The Oregon Trail, an iconic journey that shaped the American frontier. While it's often remembered as a path to adventure and new beginnings, it was also fraught with peril. Thousands of pioneers risked their lives, and many met untimely deaths along the way. But what were the real causes of death on the Oregon Trail? From disease and accidents to harsh weather and starvation, each death had a story to tell. In this video, we'll explore the 12 most brutal causes of death on the Oregon Trail and the horrifying realities these pioneers faced as they crossed the vast and dangerous frontier.
Starvation. The Oregon Trail journey was marked by scarcity, with supplies being a constant challenge for the pioneers. Along the route, there were only a handful of trading posts where settlers could replenish their provisions. This lack of access to resources made every item in the wagon precious, and many travelers found themselves relying on whatever they could carry or barter along the way. A variety of mishaps contributed to the shortage of supplies. For instance, when a wagon tipped over while crossing a river, it could lead to the loss of vital food and equipment. In some cases, pioneers had to make difficult decisions, such as abandoning goods to reduce the weight of their wagons, hoping it would make their journey easier. However, this often meant leaving behind items that could have been crucial later in the trip. If a wagon's oxen or mules were to die, it left the travelers in a precarious position. The animals were essential for pulling the wagons, and their loss often meant the group could not continue their journey. While the pioneers would have access to the meat from the animals, it only provided temporary sustenance. Being stranded without adequate supplies in the vast wilderness was a terrifying reality for many. Starvation became an all-too-common cause of death, particularly for children and families who had not timed their departure carefully. Those who left during the late spring or summer often encountered a barren trail where the grasses needed to feed their livestock were already depleted. Without enough grazing for their animals, the pioneers found themselves unable to continue at a reasonable pace, and the animals often became too weak to carry on. One of the most tragic and well-known incidents on the Oregon Trail was the fate of the Donner Party. This group of emigrants seeking to reach California took an alternate route that led them off the main trail. Unfortunately, their decision to take a shortcut proved disastrous. As they ventured into the Sierra Nevada mountains, they were caught in an early snowstorm, leaving them trapped in freezing conditions for months. Out of the original 87 members, only 48 survived, and their survival was marked by unimaginable hardship. The pioneers had no choice but to resort to extreme measures to stay alive, consuming whatever they could find, including rawhide and even parts of their wagons. This tragedy highlights the cruel and unforgiving nature of the journey westward, where survival often depended on circumstances beyond one's control. Exhaustion. For many, the Oregon Trail journey was marked by overwhelming fatigue. It's easy to dismiss exhaustion as a minor issue when compared to the more dramatic dangers, like cholera or snake bites, which were common threats along the trail. Yet the reality of life on the trail was often less sensational, but far more draining. As adults, most of us can relate to the feeling of being utterly worn out. But for pioneers, exhaustion was a daily struggle that compounded the already harsh conditions. On average, travelers on the Oregon Trail covered about 15 miles a day. While that may sound like a manageable distance, the conditions of the trail made it a grueling endeavor. Pioneers often walked alongside their wagons to ease the load on the animals, but this also meant enduring long hours of physical strain on foot. The rough terrain, unpredictable weather, and lack of proper roads made even the shortest stretch feel like a marathon. The lack of nutritious food also played a significant role in the exhaustion. With limited supplies, the diet of most pioneers was poor, lacking the essential vitamins and protein needed to keep their bodies functioning properly. Many suffered from scurvy, a disease caused by a deficiency in vitamin C, which further weakened their bodies. When someone became ill or injured, there was little opportunity for recovery. The lack of medical care and the constant pressure to keep moving meant that many never had the chance to rest and heal. Though it might not be a dramatic cause of death, exhaustion was a very real and common one. The human body has its limits, and walking across 2,000 miles of rugged terrain, often barefoot or with inadequate footwear, could break even the strongest of individuals. Coupled with exposure to diseases, harsh weather, and the relentless demands of the trail, it's not surprising that many pioneers simply succumbed to the sheer toll the journey took on their bodies. Dysentery. Dysentery was one of the most common and deadly ailments faced by pioneers on the Oregon Trail. As many of us recall from the game, this bacterial infection was a constant threat, and its devastating effects were a harsh reality for those on the trail. The disease is typically spread through contaminated food or water, often when a person unknowingly comes into contact with feces. Given the lack of proper sanitation and hygiene practices, pioneers were especially vulnerable to this risk. The absence of toilets and clean water made the trail a breeding ground for bacteria. With few options for washing hands or keeping surfaces clean, pioneers were more exposed to disease-causing pathogens than we might imagine today. Unfortunately, their situation was exacerbated by the challenge of accessing fresh, safe water. Without proper treatment or sanitation measures, the water they did find often carried harmful bacteria that led to dysentery outbreaks. Dysentery is a diarrheal disease, commonly marked by the presence of blood and mucus in the stool. In the 19th century, there was little understanding of how to treat or prevent the disease, which made it all the more dangerous. Pioneers who contracted it had very few options. Without antibiotics or even a reliable method for purifying water, the disease often spread quickly within groups, particularly when fresh water sources were scarce or contaminated. The symptoms of dysentery, severe diarrhea, dehydration, and intense weakness made it a painful and exhausting condition. The rapid dehydration caused by the loss of fluids made recovery almost impossible, especially when access to water was limited. Tragically, many pioneers who contracted dysentery did not survive, and those who did were often left weakened and vulnerable to further complications. This disease claimed the lives of many and was a relentless reminder of the harshness and unpredictability of life on the Oregon Trail. Wagon accidents. Traveling on the Oregon Trail was fraught with dangers, and wagon accidents were among the most common threats faced by pioneers. The typical wagon was about 11 feet long and often weighed more than 1,000 pounds, carrying the essential goods and supplies needed for the journey. Given the weight of the wagon and the primitive roads, it was a hazardous way to travel, and accidents could easily occur. One of the most frequent and tragic accidents was falling beneath the wheels of a moving wagon. This danger applied to both adults and children, and for the pioneers, it was an ever-present risk. The wagons themselves, though essential to their journey, were not particularly stable, especially when traveling over uneven or steep terrain. On such surfaces, wagons could easily tip over, often with devastating results. While the video game version might offer a humorous warning about losing bullets or spilling flour, the reality was far more serious. When a wagon tipped or became uncontrollable, it wasn't just the loss of goods that was at stake. People could be seriously injured or killed. Family members often stood a very real chance of being crushed beneath the weight of the wagon, the wheels, or even the oxen pulling the cart. The sheer weight and momentum of these wagons could lead to life-threatening injuries, particularly in an environment where medical help was scarce. Despite the slow pace of the wagons, typically moving at about 2 miles per hour, pioneers often struggled to avoid these accidents. Exhaustion, limited visibility, and the difficulty of climbing in and out of a moving wagon, particularly for children, made it hard to stay clear of the wheels. For families already weakened by long days of travel, the chance of such an accident was a tragic but common part of the journey. It may come as a surprise, but accidental firearm injuries were one of the more common dangers faced by pioneers on the Oregon Trail. Despite the importance of firearms for hunting and protection, many pioneers unintentionally discharged their weapons, sometimes with tragic results. These accidents often involve the shooter, a fellow traveler, or even the livestock pulling the wagons. After walking for hundreds or even thousands of miles, pioneers could become fatigued and complacent in their handling of firearms. The grueling nature of the journey led to many moments of distraction, and unfortunately, accidents were all too frequent. It was easy to become careless after long days of travel, and firearms, which were crucial for survival, became more of a danger than a tool in many instances. In fact, firearms were listed as the second most common cause of death on the trail, a statistic that highlights the inherent risks of carrying loaded weapons in such an environment. While the threat of Native American attacks was a concern early on, pioneers soon realized that these threats were relatively rare. With this realization, many travelers adopted a new practice to reduce the risk of accidents. They began leaving their rifles unloaded while stored in the wagons. This was an attempt to mitigate the danger of unintended discharges, but it also reflected the complex balance pioneers had to strike between protection and safety in their everyday lives. While firearms were essential for hunting and defense, their frequent mishandling added another layer of peril to an already dangerous journey. Animal stampedes. In the video game, many of us remember the excitement of hunting during a buffalo stampede. It was an exhilarating experience. However, for pioneers, the reality was far more dangerous. While the prospect of hunting or encountering wild animals might have seemed thrilling, rushing into a herd of massive creatures, each weighing thousands of pounds, could quickly turn deadly. What may seem like a minor accident today could have deadly consequences on the Oregon Trail. A broken bone, for example, could lead to complications such as gangrene. Without access to proper medical care, a wound like this could quickly become fatal. In an environment where resources were scarce and healthcare non-existent, something as simple as a fall could result in a life-threatening injury. It wasn't just wild animals that posed a threat. Pioneers were also at risk of being injured or killed by their own livestock. The large animals that were essential for pulling wagons and carrying supplies were unpredictable, especially in stressful situations. Stampeding animals, whether buffalo or the livestock owned by a family, were a frequent cause of accidents. In fact, animal-related incidents are often cited as the third most common cause of death on the trail. Families had to manage large herds of animals, and there were constant risks involved in doing so. Children, for example, were at risk of falling off wagons and being trampled by the hooves of oxen. These animals, though crucial for survival, could be dangerous, especially when frightened or startled. Adults also faced significant danger as they carried out daily tasks involving animals. Whether it was hunting, crossing rivers, or tending to livestock, there were countless opportunities for disaster to strike. The close proximity to animals in everyday life on the trail brought with it the constant threat of accidents. In a world where every movement had the potential to go wrong, the risk of injury or death from a stampeding animal was ever present, making the journey all the more perilous. Weather. What might seem like an unpleasant storm in today's world could have been a life-threatening event for pioneers traveling the Oregon Trail. The journey across the vast mountains and plains brought an array of severe weather conditions that added yet another layer of danger to an already perilous journey. These storms were not only uncomfortable, but often posed immediate threats to survival. Grass fires, hailstorms, and dust storms were among the most common and hazardous weather challenges faced by travelers. Hailstones could reach dangerous sizes, with each one potentially causing injury or damage to both people and property. Thunderstorms, which accompanied these hailstorms, were equally menacing. The lightning from these storms often struck wagons, and more frequently, it sparked grass fires that spread rapidly, overwhelming wagon trains that could do little to escape their path. Once ignited, a fire could destroy the trail's food supply and leave families with no resources for cooking or warmth. On the plains, tornadoes and strong winds were additional hazards. These violent weather events could strike suddenly, creating chaos and danger for those on the trail. In the deserts, the extreme heat presented its own set of problems. Wooden wagon wheels essential for travel would shrink in the heat, causing them to become fragile. To prevent the rims from falling off during the day's journey, pioneers were forced to soak the wheels each night, a labor-intensive task that added to their already grueling schedule. The heat and dry conditions also took a toll on both people and livestock. Pioneers' lips became cracked and chapped from the constant exposure to hot winds and dust. The hooves of the animals pulling the wagons would suffer from the dry terrain, making movement more difficult and painful for the livestock. While weather may not have killed as quickly as diseases like cholera or dysentery, it certainly claimed its fair share of victims. Much of the danger came from the unpredictability of the conditions. Pioneers were often unprepared for sudden storms or temperature extremes, and the lack of proper shelter or equipment left them vulnerable. Storms could swell rivers, making crossings either more dangerous or entirely impassable, thus delaying travel and increasing the risk of accidents. Grass fires would destroy grazing land, eliminating food for the animals and leaving pioneers without fuel for cooking or warmth. Cholera. Cholera earned the grim nickname of the unseen destroyer due to its sudden, debilitating nature. It was a disease that struck swiftly and relentlessly, often leading to death in a matter of hours. For those who contracted it, the experience was harrowing. A person who was feeling perfectly healthy in the morning could be gravely ill or even dead by midday. The illness began with excruciating abdominal pain, followed by uncontrollable vomiting and diarrhea. These symptoms caused rapid dehydration, which was often the fatal result if not treated immediately, though proper medical care was rarely available on the trail. Cholera was primarily spread through contaminated water, which was a constant problem for pioneers on the Oregon Trail. The lack of access to clean water and proper sanitation made it difficult to prevent the spread of the disease. Worse yet, the infected individuals remained contagious even after death, further contributing to the spread of cholera throughout the wagon trains. It wasn't uncommon for cholera to claim the lives of those who survived other illnesses, such as dysentery. In fact, cholera was one of the most common causes of death on the Oregon Trail, with estimates suggesting that up to 1/3 of all trail deaths were due to this disease. During the journey, cholera outbreaks occurred with alarming frequency, devastating entire wagon trains. The rapid transmission of cholera was fueled not just by contaminated water, but also by poor hygiene practices. Many pioneers, unaware of the dangers, unknowingly camped near the remains of earlier travelers who had been infected. The lack of proper burial practices for the deceased also played a role in perpetuating the spread. Corpses were often left inadequately buried or in locations where they could contaminate the water supply, further exacerbating the problem. This combination of unsanitary conditions, limited medical knowledge, and the absence of modern hygiene practices created a perfect storm for cholera to spread rapidly among the pioneers. The disease was not just a tragic event for individual families, but a constant threat that loomed over every wagon train on the Oregon Trail. Snakebite. Rattlesnakes were one of the many dangers that pioneers faced on their journey along the Oregon Trail. While it might seem like an incidental peril, it was all too real for those traveling westward. Often, when everything seemed to be going smoothly, good weather, healthy oxen, and an ample supply of food, an unexpected rattlesnake bite could strike, disrupting what might have otherwise been a fortunate day. On the trail, encounters with these venomous snakes were not uncommon, especially in the warmer, arid regions. Unfortunately, when bitten, pioneers had limited resources for treatment. The knowledge of how to treat a rattlesnake bite was rudimentary at best, and many of the methods employed were both primitive and painful. Some pioneers attempted to use gunpowder to cauterize the wound, setting it on fire after applying it to the bite. While this might have been thought to burn out the poison, it likely caused intense additional pain and could have worsened the situation. Others tried to cut the wound open with a knife in hopes of removing the venom, or even attempted to carve an X at the site of the bite to encourage the poison to flow out. Perhaps the most alarming remedy involved having another person suck the venom from the wound, a practice that was as dangerous as it was ineffective. Sadly, these home remedies had little success in saving lives. In many cases, if the bite occurred on a limb, the individual could survive if the wound was treated quickly enough, sometimes by amputation, but if the bite was to the torso, survival was rare. The lack of proper medical care, coupled with the difficulty of traveling to find help, made snake bites one of the most feared hazards on the trail. For many pioneers, it was a harsh reminder of how every part of their environment, whether it was the weather, disease, or the wildlife, was a constant threat to their survival. Even a small mistake or bad luck could quickly turn a routine journey into a life or death struggle. River crossings. As emigrants journeyed westward toward Oregon, crossing rivers became one of their greatest challenges. The trail was dotted with numerous waterways, with some of the most notorious being the Green, Kansas, North Platte, Snake, and Columbia rivers. These crossings were treacherous for multiple reasons, and each presented its own unique dangers. Unlike today, the pioneers didn't have the luxury of well-established ferry services to transport their wagons across these rivers. Most travelers had to rely on their own judgment to determine the safest crossing points. Unfortunately, inexperienced pioneers often made poor decisions, encountering quicksand, deep water, and the remnants of previous failed attempts. These hazards added to the uncertainty of crossing any river and made the journey even more perilous. In addition to the natural obstacles, many emigrants lacked proper swimming skills. This was a significant issue when crossing wide, fast-moving rivers. The currents were strong, and without the ability to swim or navigate the water effectively, travelers were at risk of being swept away. Wagon trains, heavily laden with supplies, would often overturn in the rushing waters, sending the pioneers and their oxen tumbling downstream. Many were unable to recover their belongings, and tragically, some drowned in the process. Even when ferries were available, the situation was not much better. In many cases, ferry operators looking to maximize profits overloaded their boats with too many passengers and wagons. This often led to capsizing, leaving everyone on board in a perilous situation. If the passengers survived, they faced the challenge of recovering their wagons, which were essential for transporting their belongings. If the wagons were lost, the pioneers were left without the supplies they needed to survive the journey, which could lead to starvation or further hardship down the road. The threat of river crossings was so serious that it is estimated that a significant number of pioneers met their end in these very rivers. The combination of cold water, powerful currents, and dangerous undertows meant that even the slightest misstep or accident could prove fatal. Without the resources to properly address the risks of crossing, emigrants were often left at the mercy of nature's whims. Even skilled swimmers, who might have been able to navigate some of the water hazards, stood little chance in the face of these overwhelming natural forces. In the end, crossing rivers on the Oregon Trail was a life-or-death ordeal for many. Whether it was the lack of resources, the dangerous conditions of the rivers themselves, or the unpredictable weather, crossing these waterways proved to be one of the most dangerous aspects of the pioneers' journey westward. Measles. In modern times, measles is generally considered a preventable disease due to widespread vaccination. However, for pioneers on the Oregon Trail, there was no such safety net. Without access to vaccines or modern medicine, diseases like measles were much more dangerous, especially for children. Measles is an extremely contagious viral infection that primarily affects the respiratory system. For those unprotected, particularly children, the likelihood of contracting the disease upon exposure was very high. The symptoms of measles are distinctive and begin with a high fever and a persistent cough. This is soon followed by the appearance of small white spots inside the mouth, known as Koplik spots, which are often an early sign of the disease. Several days later, a red rash typically appears, starting at the hairline and gradually spreading down the body. As the rash progresses, The flat spots become raised bumps, often leaving the individual feeling feverish and fatigued. While measles today is rare, thanks to vaccines and better health care, it was a significant threat to families traveling along the Oregon Trail. The cramped conditions inside covered wagons, combined with limited access to sanitation and health care, made the spread of such contagious diseases inevitable. Once one family member contracted measles, it wasn't unusual for it to quickly spread throughout the entire wagon train, often leading to widespread illness and death. Without any real medical treatment or remedies to combat the disease, survival was rare for children who became infected with measles. The disease was especially fatal in young children, whose immune systems were weaker. The lack of proper nutrition, shelter, and sanitation on the trail further weakened their ability to fight off infections. With no antibiotics, no vaccinations, and limited medical knowledge, pioneers had few defenses against illnesses like measles, which contributed to high mortality rates, particularly among the young. The impact of measles on the Oregon Trail was devastating. It wasn't just the death toll that was significant, but also the emotional and psychological toll on families who watched as their children fell ill and died from a disease that is preventable today. The lack of effective treatment, combined with the harsh conditions of the trail, made measles one of the leading causes of death for children among the emigrants. For pioneers traveling the Oregon Trail, illnesses like measles were a constant looming threat. Families who were already exhausted from the difficult journey, struggling to find food and water, and battling other diseases like dysentery, were now faced with the terrifying prospect of losing loved ones to an easily preventable disease. Measles was not just a physical threat. It added to the emotional burden of an already grueling and dangerous journey. The Oregon Trail was a journey of hope, but it was also one of hardship, suffering, and death. Each of these brutal causes of death serves as a testament to the resilience and perseverance of those who dared to make the long, perilous journey westward. From disease to accidents, the challenges pioneers faced were nothing short of extraordinary. The true cost of the Oregon Trail wasn't just in miles traveled, but in the lives lost along the way.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.